Welcome to the Biotech Startups podcast by Exceeder. Join us as we speak with first-time founders, serial entrepreneurs, and experienced investors about the challenges and triumphs of running a biotech startup, from pre-seed to IPO, with your host, John Chi. In our last episode, Bogdan Knezevic shared stories about his childhood in Serbia and Canada, how his parents' immigrant journey shaped his work ethic, and how competitive swimming taught him the discipline to balance sport and school. If you missed it, be sure to check out part 1. In part 2, Bogdan reflects on his undergrad years at the University of Calgary, his early interest in neuroscience, and the decision to pursue a PhD at Oxford after winning a Rhodes Scholarship. He also talks about walking away from elite athletics, adapting to Oxford's academic culture, and how that experience pushed him to rethink his path.
It's for real, like that. Because I always think about like the part that kind of, is this like there's great science everywhere, right? And I'm like, how can we unlock this for like and have it actually reach patients, actually start moving the needle? And I'm like it bums me out to see great science just like struggle because it doesn't have all these like perfectly stars aligning in their region. And and now I'm just like, at least for me, pie in the sky dream is that where it's like we can have these hotbed regions all over the place. It doesn't just have to be contained to the usual suspects. So anyways, you're right. We went into a tangent, but to get back to your experience, this sounds freaking awesome. And this was at Hotchkiss Brain Institute.
Yeah, the Brain Institute. Yeah. Which was launched and kind of part of the University of Calgary.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that you were doing like a bunch of different projects like all through undergrad, and via kind of this kind of in the institute. When did you, like, I'm going to guess via this experience of being in the lab and like publishing and everything like that, was that where like grad school is like definitely in my sights?
Yeah, I think it was exactly that. And I think for me, I also was interested in medical school, because it was like a lot of applied science knowledge. And
Yeah.
my uncle, he's a doctor now, but had been going through that. And so I think the idea, no, I always try and like not make sure that there's no revisionism happening when I'm like
Yeah.
truly putting myself in the position like what was my thinking then, and not like what's the story I've now told myself. I think basically my thinking was there's a lot of cool science going on. Medical school sounds really interesting. It sounds like a profession that I can picture myself doing. I might want to do like other kind of science on the side. And I saw my uncle doing an MD PhD, and so I thought, okay, those seem like viable routes. I wasn't at the time at all like picky in like what order I do it. I think I thought like I'll do medical school first. But what happened was in my second last year of undergrad, I saw a poster somewhere of someone from the University of Calgary who had won a Rhodes Scholarship. And so I was like, huh, like, what is that? And so then I started Googling what that is and found out that it's like, the world's oldest scholarship, like the most, in the classical sense, prestigious scholarship, and that it was geared towards people who, from whatever sector they're from, want to like somehow lead or innovate or pioneer or like advocate for their field and like push it. So it was a combination of it was like not the place you'd go if you want to go really deep on like one niche field. It was like whatever field plus like leadership and engagement and all of that. And that to me was super resonant. Funnily enough, this is where like if I'm being fully honest with myself, like a huge portion of the reason that I was even interested in that, or that like set me off on that rabbit hole, was me having this like obsession with wanting to like at some point do something at Oxford because like a lot of the authors I liked had gone there, and
Yeah,
like
yeah,
Tolkien
yeah,
and C.S. Lewis and like Oscar
yeah.
Wilde.
Hell
And so I
yeah.
was like, oh, it'd be really cool to just like study at Oxford for the old sole reason of like there were other really cool people that had studied there. Like how many
Yeah.
universities in the world are like several hundred years old. And so in my head, I was like, okay, cool. Like that concept I would love to do. And there's a scholarship that had these like values that I aligned with, and that could be a really great vehicle to do that, because otherwise it'd be very hard to picture how you with without going into a lot of like student debt and loans, how do you like pay for schooling for that long as like a foreign national? And so, but in my head it was like, okay, Rhodes seems to be a good route that's like aligned with the kind of stuff I care about personally. But there I had started looking at like other funding mechanisms by which to do that. And so when I ended up getting the Rhodes Scholarship, what it gives you is like up to 3 years fully funded of um any degree that the university offers, which is like a really cool concept. And so to me, I'm like, okay, that's kind of the decision of like doing med. You couldn't do it towards put it towards med school. That was like a stipulation, because med school in the UK, like in a lot of other countries in the world, it's something you start from undergrad. It's like a 6 year program and it starts at undergrad. And so basically the Rhodes Trust said like you can't do that, because even if we went 3 years, you'd still have like 3 more years, and that's like a different medical system. So take anything but medical school. So that was the deciding factor of like, okay, I'm gonna do my grad school portion first, because would be silly to forego this opportunity.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And I was the and like I love how sometimes it just like it, exactly like the kind of revisionist kind of thing. You're like, yeah, you kind of have this story that you can kind of like plot out, but you're just like, no, the decision was actually just like quite simple. Like, I wanted to be at a cool place with cool that had cool people, like, and that sometimes is
And
it.
the seed for that was like my uncle when I was 9 years old taking me to like this janky theater near us in the strip mall to see the first Lord of the Rings that he wanted to see because he had read the books, and we're only like 12 years apart, so like he's halfway in age between me and my mom, so it was more like an older brother.
Yeah,
So him like bringing me to show me the first Lord of the Rings and me being like awestruck,
yeah, this
and
is
like that was
sick.
the actual reason why like I think I
It
ended up
is.
where I am.
That's, I mean, like that's the craziest part. Is like it sometimes is as simple as that. Like sometimes it really is as simple as that. And but and also Oxford's not a half bad place to be. Like
Sure.
right? It's great. I think it's pretty decent. And so now, okay, you're heading to Oxford. What was that experience like being, moving from Canada to the UK? How was that for you? Just like personally, professionally? What was it like?
The move to the UK, there's things I can comment on, and I will. I think the first it's like a tapestry of different things. There was like what was the experience of Oxford.
Yep.
There's what was the experience of the communities I was a part of. And there was what was the experience of like being a grad student, in general, not just tied to the location. And then also what was the UK experience. I think each of those is like worth touching on because they're all slightly different. I think like Oxford itself, it's like probably the easiest place to start because I've thought uh a lot about like how to describe it, and it to me it's very much like a place, like a pretty magical feeling place that's like frozen in time. It's like being frozen in time,
Interesting.
which means that it can also be very isolating and it can also feel very disconnected from reality. So everything, I don't think anything comes with just pros. It's always pros and cons, but it was this place where, the buildings are hundreds and hundreds of years old. So you're literally like cycling through the same streets that all of these people that I had like, kind of worshipped growing up
Yeah.
cycled through. You're walking through the same halls, like you're eating at the same tables. The quality of food probably has not improved in all those
Yeah.
time in all those
Yeah.
years. But there's something like really special about that. Yeah, like I said, magical. And um even just, yeah, the kind of conversations you pick up around you. And like you'd go to a pub, and one of the kind of early things I realized is like pub culture is in the UK, or at least in Oxford, is like very different than bar culture in North America. Where bar culture in North America I always associated with like you go to get like drunk and like dance, like flirt with people, like that's the aim. Whereas like pub culture at Oxford was very much like a social, like third space, where you go to like have conversation. And like you're not getting, yeah, of course there's people who get drunk, but the goal isn't like go and get like plastered or whatever. It's like have like meaningful social interaction. And so like I had all these memories of just going, even if it's like I'm just going to grab like a drink after a long day, just like by myself, and just hearing what people around me are talking about, and like debating like the most interesting things, and like physics and like world politics, and like a lot of like social right movements that started around then. And like I think Trump first getting elected around then, which obviously had a lot of people thinking like, okay, so what can we like, if there's a lot of change happening in the world, like why is it happening? And like a lot of
Interesting.
like very interesting AI blowing up as a space around
Yeah,
then.
yeah,
So
yeah.
super fascinating place to be. At the same time, like I had this strong feeling that you could blink and like 10 years would go by and you wouldn't realize it, because you'd be in this like fantasy world, and it could be so like the ivory towerness of it could be so decoupled from the outside world. And it's a very transient place. A lot of people coming in for school and then leaving, which meant that it's not easy to form like roots and long-lasting bonds in the same way. So
Quick question on that.
yeah,
So in Berkeley, it's kind of the opposite. Like people go to Berkeley. My parents ended up the reason why I was even in Berkeley was my dad ended up doing grad school at Berkeley and then setting up roots in Berkeley, just never leaving. Like and so I've never been to Oxford and the kind of surrounding area. Do people just not like people go in out don't really like sit, like is that just
yeah,
like the MO?
that's generally the MO. Yeah. So like it's not, so Cambridge is much more a distillation of just the school.
Hmm.
And then quickly, like not much
Yeah.
else in that central area. Hopefully I'm not, I'm sure I'm pissing some
Yeah,
people
yeah,
off
yeah,
who
yeah, yeah.
are
Like
like Oxford. Oxford is
generalizing here. Yeah, yeah.
Oxford is much more like you have the concept is like town and gown, where gown is like the scholars and town is town. So you do have like this, it's like a bigger hub, because it was also at the intersection of like two big north-south and east-west train lines
Got it.
historically. And so you do have that, but still the pattern, I think, because the emphasis, a lot of it's like academia,
Hmm.
and academia often for like academia's sake.
Yep.
It means that like only really the people who definitely want to be academics are the ones like staying there.
Hmm. Got
And
it.
if you wanted to do anything, even that's like tangential to that, well, then you're probably, going to London, or leaving and going abroad. And I think also with the grad community, I don't know, I'm curious what it's like if you looked at undergrad. I still think it's pretty transient. But the grad community is really interesting there because it is very multicultural, and you get people from I think there's like impressions people have of Oxford, and there's the like a lot of the kind of negative impressions probably are driven by like what is actually like the undergrad thing, which ends up again being a lot of like historically like privileged and wealthy families that can get there. But the grad component, like all of my friends were like South African, Zimbabwean, New Zealand, or Canadian, uh like a
All
bunch
over
of
the place.
different places
Yeah.
all over the place, which then means that like a lot of people want to go back when they finish. And so I think that makes it a hard place to be in for a really long time, unless you're someone who really could be like in the clouds thinking about problems
Yeah.
and like theoretically or like academically. So that's Oxford as Oxford. Um, I think the UK, I mean, I touched on some of this with my like pub comment, but the UK, it's funny, like not great food. It's not gonna make it not great food. And then also it's interesting. Like I
Well,
definitely
I guess for compared, you're in New York right now, so you're like in the
yeah, yeah,
mecca
yeah,
of
yeah,
good
yeah, yeah, yeah,
food.
yeah.
You're like, dude,
Yeah,
you're spoiled, man.
I'm
Like
spoiled. And
you're
Toronto
spoiled.
too. Toronto
Yeah.
was like pretty good for multicultural food as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, yeah.
Where I obviously came from. Yeah, I think the UK is interesting because like British people have a certain like I don't know like the way that I don't know if it's like play with language. It's just a very interesting different sense of humor and stands towards like don't feel bad about myself. Like it's interesting. I think the biggest thing I had to unlearn actually from there um is how to write more precise emails because
Really?
yeah, because like when I was emailing and communicating there, I found that the British way of you use a lot of words
Hmm.
and you have to like as a reader kind of like look for the real meaning there.
Interesting.
And so people won't say again generalizing here, but people won't say like that's a bad idea. They'll say like that is an interesting idea. We might want to consider doing blah, 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 which actually like that's like I
Yeah.
don't know, yeah, random example, but that
Yeah.
might actually translate to like that's stupid, do this other thing. But you kind of like use
You have to read
language
between the
like
lines.
this. Yeah,
Yeah.
and so I didn't realize that I had like picked that up until I had moved back. And then I think someone directly told me like, can you just like tell me what you like or don't like? Like
Yeah.
just be more direct. And I realized, oh, I lost some of that directness in how I communicate, and I'm still working on it to this day, like how to get
Interesting.
more precise.
That's super interesting. And so I have family and buddies of mine who run businesses in Tokyo or in Japan. Um, they have a Osaka office and a Tokyo office, and headquarters is in Tokyo. And Tokyo Japanese like communication style is very can be very similar to that, kind of like indirect read between the lines. Um, and Osaka is a little bit better because they can be more direct and it's not like a faux pas. So the even regionally in Japan, I saw I saw it and kind of experienced it, and in order to kind of to basically standardize it across the company, they they made English the operating language, and part of it is like structurally Japanese in that the words can be the same word can be interpreted in multiple ways. It happens in English too, but less it's less frequent. And you can be more direct in English than you can be in Japanese, just structurally. And basically, and it kind of like eliminated that kind of like also the Tokyo versus Osaka, like what the hell are you saying to me? Like I don't really know. And so there's like, okay, we're speaking English and we're just doing it. And it basically turned like operationally turned the company into like kind of a slower feedback cycle. The feedback cycles got way quicker once they not just I'm not saying that English is like a superior language. I'm not
Yeah, yeah,
saying
yeah.
that. I'm just saying from a business perspective, they're like, okay, got it. I understand what you need. Like, we're gonna go do this now. Versus before, they're like, what the heck? Like, I need to like I need to read into this. Like, what the hell are you actually saying and want? Anyways, that's really fascinating.
Yeah,
Okay, so
yeah.
I super interrupted you. You're
No, no,
so
no, no.
so like
All
the
good.
UK, it seems like they're it's an interesting cause. I mean, you're talking about like the communication style and something you had to unlearn broadly about kind of not just Oxford, but the UK in general. Tell me more about kind of the things of the personal, the professional being in the UK.
Yeah, yeah. I think went through a reinvention or rediscovery of myself too, like you mentioned, after stopping sports, because I had made the decision at that point to stop swimming.
Yeah.
I was actually thinking about um, whether to train for another year. So um, I had uh achieved like the Olympic qualifying time in 2012 for the events I was doing, but didn't get to compete. Variety of reasons there. I like to think of it as like, had I just been faster, I would have gone.
Yeah, yeah,
There
yeah,
were
yeah.
other changes that had happened that meant like in any other Olympics I would have gone, but
Yeah.
like at the end of the day, like I do want to take ownership of like, had I been faster, I would have gone, even if
Yeah,
I
yeah,
like
yeah.
qualified, technically
Yeah.
I'd qualified. So the thinking going into um grad school, because I started grad school in the fall of 2015, so it was like, okay, do I want to train for the 2016 Olympics? And at that point, so I looked into it, and Oxford as a university wouldn't have had like a strong enough team. But I contacted a couple of people I knew at more senior levels from my time. Just I had raced both for Canada and for Serbia at like the at World Championships and multiple times, and so I thankfully knew coaches that had worked in a lot of different contexts, including some that have been in the UK. And so I asked them like if there were good coaches like in that area, and they did point me to someone who I ended up contacting, but it was something like, I don't know, 15 or 20 miles outside of Oxford. And so for me to do two workouts a day would have been about, 60 to 80 miles of commuting. And so I basically realized, like, okay, the decision is, do I do this and basically do nothing other than swim and grad school? There wasn't I could have in theory not deferred, but just declined the Rhodes Scholarship, which to me would have been a mistake. And I stand by that. But then there was a decision of, okay, can I make both work? And I thought there's a chance. It would mean not doing anything else, so not getting anything else out of this experience. And a large portion of the experience of being there is like the community of other people. And so I would have had to basically forego that. And there's always a chance that like just because of certain politics and things that are always unfortunately happen in sport that are not actually tied to the athletes,
Yeah.
there was a chance that like I could have done great and qualified and then still not been
Yep.
selected. And so I just thought, you know what? I've gotten everything I can out of this sport. I knew myself, I knew how competitive I was with myself. And so I know I had built this up as like, oh, if I just achieve the Olympics, I'll be like happy. But then I started questioning, like, is that true? Because like I've been to world championships like two or three
Yeah.
times. So, and I still like my bar as the Olympics. And so I feel like I would have also then after that felt like, okay, well, oh, I could probably, if I just put in more work, I could probably final at the Olympics. So like now it's, let's go for another 4 years. And it
Yep.
just never would have
Never
stopped.
stops. Never
Um,
stops.
and so I told myself, look, I am gonna be no better off if I like achieve more. I will be leaving a lot on the table by not engaging more deeply with this experience that is like a once in a lifetime experience.
I felt
And
the
so I should just do
exact
that.
same way at Berkeley. Like you're in this like area for a finite amount of time. Don't squander this opportunity. And so I empathize.
Yeah.
I like, but
Yeah,
it's
100%.
painful. It's like it's
Yeah.
painful though.
It's painful. So that kind of like rediscovery of like who I am, like what's like yeah, how do I value myself? How do I value others? I found it simultaneously easy and difficult in the context I was in. I found it easy because I had decided to stop before I got to Oxford, and so there wasn't this like net like social circle of people that thought of like me as Bogdan the swimmer. And so
Yeah.
I was like, okay, there's not that much, indirect pressure. I did find it hard because and this is an Oxford thing, but also I think a Rhodes thing, which is like you're around so many people that not just are not only impressive as individuals, but part of the reason why they are there is because they can polish and present in pretty incredible ways. So now you have like people who are objectively impressive and people
Yeah.
who can make themselves seem very impressive.
Yeah.
And so it's this constant like I'm hearing about this amazing person, like all this stuff, and people who I was like just mind blown of like the
Yeah.
amount of work that they had done, like the activism that they had done, and like risk going to jail in their countries for stuff that they had believed in while like finishing med school. I'm like, that is wild.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I'm like questioning. First of all, like lost this huge piece of my life, and also in my first year was when I realized like, oh, I don't want to be a researcher anymore. So I'm questioning like, what am I doing here? Like, do I just leave or do I not? Like, all this energy that I have, like, what do I direct it towards? Um, and so that portion I think was very very difficult. And it was a very stark contrast to undergrad and swimming, where for both of those things, so for undergrad, you obviously have like very specified exams that you're doing and curriculum. And so you have like a very easy metric of like, am I doing well? For swimming, um, you are gunning for longer term goals because the like Olympic cycle is every 4 years. So there is this notion of like I need to break these down into like constituent pieces and like track progress. But still you have like an objective thing, which is the time that you're like lowering. And then to flip that and basically go into a research-based grad program at a
Yeah.
university that was notorious for like sink or swim, that was just like whatever you want to do yourself.
Yeah.
That was like completely night and day. And very hard to be to know like was I doing well? And my very first kind of brush with I think what a lot of people do end up experiencing just when they go to the workforce, which is like all of these things of like knowing exactly if you're doing good or not are like gone when you're an
Yeah.
adult and
Yeah.
like you have to figure it out now.
Yeah. By the way, that it is like that was my exact same kind of experience. Just like there was like yeah, just like clear kind of like metrics that you can measure yourself by. But now like, you know, kind of similarly in like kind of your a grad experience, like a lab experience, you're kind of like you feel like you're just like meandering in like uncertainty in like this jungle. You're like
Yeah.
I always think about it as like you have like a machete in a jungle and you're just like
Yeah.
you're like, when is there going like to be an end here? You're
Yeah.
just
And you could be
slicing
so
away.
close to it and not know, or so
Not
far
know.
from it and like
Yeah.
not know. I think that's a really good analogy. Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah,
I didn't do, yeah.
it's like a meme almost. You know that meme the person's like digging.
Yeah, like the digging one.
Yeah, yeah, that digging one. There's like it's right there, but you just stop.
Yeah, yeah. And I think like a couple other things that again, if I went back, I don't think I would change anything, which to me is usually a good barometer of like what am I happy or not about the experiences. But I also at the time when I was picking what to do there, what program to do, and I decided to do a PhD, and then decided like, hey, I kind of want to do it in a field where that's like emerging, and pick up some technical skills that I felt like I didn't have. And to me, where that led me to was um like the intersection of computation and biology, which again was manifesting through like genomics and like multiomics and ML. And so I did like a pretty hard again, all the research I did in undergrad was like behavioral neuro. So it was a pretty big 180 to basically go from that to like looking at my first line of code and like trying to apply like ML. And I remember like and again the norm at in the UK often, or at least in Oxford, is like you don't this idea of like you go from undergrad to PhD is like people don't do it. It's like you do a master's and it's usually in the same like you don't switch fields. And so like most people there had like masters in that field, and I'm here like literally going into like Andrew Ng's courses to like learn ML or like like
Yeah.
learn how to like use MATLAB or like R, and like understand the like packages, and so that I can like do the thing that I'm supposed to actively be doing. Through conversation with people you realize like that's there was nothing unique or special about my case. Everyone is kind of feeling the same like, oh my God, what am I doing? And like trying to like plug their like gaps how they can. So the things I felt lucky for is because I realized early on that I didn't want to be an academic, and that caused a lot of like existential angst. But
Yep.
thankfully, again in the UK, the culture is like if you're doing research, it's like you're just doing research. There's not an expectation that you're like TAing. You only publish like how much you want if that's like what you want to do. But if you're there to do a PhD and like you want to be in and out in 3 to 4 years, like you could be in and out in 3 to 4 years, which is like very different from North America, where PhDs are like 5, 6, 7, 8 years. So I am thankful for that because it helped me basically not have to like think about TAing or publishing stuff that was not directly aligned with my research. And then when I realized like I don't want to be an academic, and that therefore that freed me from like the pressure of like I need a bunch of like first author publications, it also made me more okay with like when there was political things that came up, and like there was a paper I should have been first author on, but there was like a bunch of competing interests and stuff. And I was like, you know what? Fine. Like, that's fine. Put me a second. Like, I don't care because this is not what my life's gonna be. But yeah, that whole experience sometimes feels like so acute and visceral, and sometimes it feels like an entire whirlwind where I'm like, what actually even happened those 4 years? Like,
Yeah. I know that
yeah,
feeling. I know that exact feeling.
yeah.
And so now, okay, so it sounds like you're like, oh, and I think a big part, what, life in general is like figuring out what you don't want to do so you can get to what you want to do eventually. It's kind of people who are like, I just think of it as like, it's just one big trial and error. Like that's really what it is. It's just like you're just you're in this jungle macheting away. Don't like where I'm going here. Just doesn't feel good. And then you just start like hacking away somewhere else. And I know during your time, in the UK and at Oxford, you know, you had it sounds like you had some kind of like industry experience. Is that when you're like, okay, academia is not where I want to be. Maybe I should dip my toes into industry.
Yeah, so yes, exactly. That's right. So I realized that academia probably wasn't it. And I started also questioning like, okay, well, med school, that plan to go do med school after probably doesn't make sense because like, do I want to be in school for 4 more years before starting to specialize? And I did at the time like start to like mini panic a bit, like what
Yeah,
am
yeah, yeah.
I like what should I do? And so again, lucky that my supervisor was pretty supportive of me like taking basically sabbatical, taking a step back and saying like I want to go like work for a few months, and then also like potentially change projects to something more like less wet lab and more computational. Um and he was supportive. So I did actually take a leave, and through just emailing people in the network, ended up working at like a seed stage biotech that was based out of it was like a Harvard MIT spin out. It was like a Bob Langer lab spin out. And got it put in touch with them and was like, hey, I would like love to work with y'all on anything except bench science. Like I'm willing to do whatever, but just not bench science. And it worked out because I ended up because they were gearing up for like what's the thing that they can tell to raise a series A and like
Hmm.
actually scale. And so I worked directly with the CTO and CEO
Nice.
to to do literally whatever it was. And like a lot of it wasn't glamorous, which was great because it kind of uh to jump to the conclusion, I left that being like, okay, I really want to work in early stage companies. Like I love this. And it's nice because that was my conclusion, even though the work itself, a lot of it wasn't super glamorous. Like some of it was kind of what people in like the media, how media might portray it, where it was like, oh, like PR positioning meetings, like marketing workshops. But a lot of it was like pull data into a spreadsheet and like figure out like how to format it so that when like you go and present to this pharma company, like they get it. Or like be in that meeting and like clarify something. Or like find what conferences we should go to that make sense for
Thank you for saying that because, like, I think, look, media does great things. Media is like, this is not to make people mad or just brush too broad of strokes, but like, company building is not all glamorous. Like, a lot of it is just like taking out the trash, doing the dishes, doing your laundry, and but it's like the willingness to do it, right? It kind of reminds me of like what you were talking about with your like upbringing and like the immigrant experience. It's like we're not above it. Like we're not above it, regardless of where you come from. We're gritty and we're gonna get it done. And like a lot of, you know, that willingness to do it at an early stage company can sometimes be the make or break. It's like not glamorous stuff. Um, when you think you're, I think when you think you're above it, that's when you're cooked. Like that's when a company is cooked. It's like if you think you're above whatever, like taking out the proverbial trash or doing the proverbial dishes or the laundry, whatever.
Sometimes literal. I remember like
Yeah,
the
yeah,
early
exactly.
days was like sometimes literally in the early days of my co-founders, it was like there were definitely moments where just like my technical co-founder just like needed to grind out stuff, and I was like, and we
I
were
got you.
kind of co-living, and I was like, yeah, I'm gonna just like make the meal or like do the dishes,
Yeah,
like
I
literally,
got you.
because it's like the better use of our collective time than like us
Yeah,
being fair and like sharing this in some way.
exactly. Like,
Like,
I'm just gonna go do it.
yeah,
I'm just
yeah,
gonna go
yeah,
do it. Anyways,
yeah,
I appreciate that because like I think about it too. Is just like you know the littlest things, like the littlest things matter. And
yeah.
no matter how like kind of inconsequential you might think it is, they add up, and you kind of have to, you got to get it done.
And I think this is like something that I'm still like figuring out how to navigate like well 10 times out of 10, not just 99
Yeah,
9.9 times out of 10,
yeah, yeah,
which
yeah,
is
yeah.
like how do you flex between the two? Because I think it's very easy. The like typical kind of like VC approach also is like obviously your time is the most valuable thing. So I think there is a lot of push of like okay, like hire someone, like don't do that, do something else. And like yes, in a world where it's capital is like pretty infinite or like cheap or whatever, like sure, do that. But the reality is like that's usually not a healthy way to approach it. And like it's if your default behavior becomes like, okay, this is now kind of like annoying and like hire someone or delegate it, like I don't know if I believe that you should like always just do the thing. Or like you should always do that. I think there's like value in just like doing the thing yourself, even if it takes like longer. Anyway, it's like a whole other tangent, but
No,
um
I struggle with that too, but I think from organizational design, like well, there's like one thing, like sweating the details and getting your hands dirty, no matter how like nominal, inconsequential you might think the thing is, I think makes leaders better. One, it's like leading from the front. Two, you become intimately aware of like where things can be improved, right? If this becomes a constant occurrence where you're like, hey, technical co-founder, I'm always doing this, maybe I should have a full-time cook to cook
sure.
who, right, and then I'll go do something else, right? But I think from time to time, if it's something that doesn't like become like a big scaling issue, like just get it done. Like we're just like, like we can just like turn this around and like get this going.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Biotech Startups podcast with Bogdan Knezevic. Join us for part 3, where Bogdan shares how his experience at Frequency reinforced his desire to work in startups, and how that realization changed the way he approached the rest of grad school. He talks about building the Rhodes Incubator, the startup-like challenges of running student-led organizations, and the power of putting yourself in high serendipity situations. We'll also hear how his time at Creative Destruction Lab and Entrepreneur First helped him sharpen his perspective on what kind of company he wanted to build and who he wanted to build it with. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend. See you next time. The Biotech Startups podcast is produced by Exceeder. Don't want to miss an episode? Search for the Biotech Startups podcast wherever you get your podcasts and click subscribe. Exceeder provides research labs with equipment leases on founder-friendly terms to support paths to exceptional outcomes. To learn more, visit our website www.exceeder.com. On behalf of the team here at Exceeder, thanks for listening. The Biotech Startups podcast provides general insights into the life science sector through the experiences of its guests. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from the podcast is at the user's own risk. The views expressed by the participants are their own and are not the views of Exceeder or sponsors. No reference to any product, service, or company in the podcast is an endorsement by Exceeder or its guests.